Hi, I am welcoming SAJ, who is starting to watch this recording on Yom Kippur, and welcoming Rabbi Sandra Lawson, who is my guest today, for us to have this really important conversation about race, racism, and the Jewish community. One of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we've been able to have and facilitate conversations that are across geographic borders. And we're really glad to be with you and to have this really important conversation on such an auspicious day of self-reflection and growth for us as Jews, as Jewish community, and as part of a bigger whole. So today, for everyone who's here, I just want to make sure everyone knows Rabbi Sandra Lawson is a wonderful rabbi, and she is also the inaugural director of Racial Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Reconstructing Judaism, which, for those who may not know, is the larger movement of which SAJ is part of. Rabbi Sandra and I do know each other a bit. When I was in Philadelphia, she was in rabbinical school, and I hired Rabbi Sandra to be one of our Hebrew school teachers, and she got to teach in the Hebrew school for the synagogue that I was running. So I'm so happy to have you. Yeah, Sandra, just want to extend our welcome. And I know, obviously, even though you cannot see SAJ, they are welcoming you too.
I feel it. I feel it. I totally feel it. Thank you.
Great. So did you want to share any opening words of wisdom or thoughts about the conversation we're going to have before we dive in?
Yeah, first of all, I'm looking forward to this conversation. You've always been one of my favorite rabbis and colleagues, and so I'm really glad to be here. And one day I hope to visit your synagogue, SAJ, because the history in person. And one of the things I do before I do any kind of talking is offer a blessing and gratitude, because any opportunity today to be in community with people, in conversation with people, because there's many of us are still isolated, is an amazing opportunity. So the best blessing of gratitude that I know of is, for me, Moda Ani, and I often translate it a variety of ways depending on what's happening. Moda ani lefanecha ruachai v'chayam she'azarta bi nishmati b'chimlecha rabbi menetzecha. I thank you, the divine source of all, for breathing life into me, allowing me to be present in this moment, and you, the divine source, are awesome.
Great. Thank you so much for that grounding for us today. We would love, I know you and all the wonderful things you do in this world, but I don't know how much the people who are in the room know and or at home watching know. So would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So I was ordained or graduated RRC in 2018. And before that, I was a lay leader in a congregation in Atlanta, congregation Beit Havarim, and that's where in that community, where I was very happy being a Jew in the pew, I started to think more about going to rabbinical school, which I actually thought was kind of crazy at the time. And I was actually on track to get a PhD in sociology. I had a well thought out path to get a PhD, and I started to feel this ridiculous pull to go to rabbinical school, which I didn't understand. So instead of going to get a PhD, I started working for the Anti-Defamation League instead as a researcher. And that pull was still there, and here I am. And today, my background in sociology, which predates my rabbinic career, has been really helpful in this moment to help people understand what's happening in our society. Oh, I also forgot a little tidbit too. Before all that, I was in the military, and so I have a background in law enforcement too, which also adds to this moment that we are in.
I wanted to also, there's also a bodybuilding part of it. Right? That's like the thing I remember the most about you from the first.
Yes, I was a competitive powerlifter and a competitive bodybuilder long time ago. So I can lift heavy things and put them down.
Well, it's so great to have you. Yeah. And we're so happy that you're now leading our entire movement and thinking about race and how we can be the best versions of ourselves as communities in supporting all of the Jewish community, the ones who are in our doors and the ones who are not in our doors, the ones who are coming up, in the ranks and all of that. So today we're going to sort of just begin by exploring that, exploring the experiences of Jews of color in particular. When we planned this conversation a few months back, we didn't know that it would actually be in this really auspicious moment of public conversations about race in the Jewish community, because there actually are, and you can explain more of it, I'll share a teeny bit, that there are two studies that came out in relative proximity to each other, sort of these population studies. The first is the Pew study, which happens every few years, which is a demographic study of the Jewish people and lots of different facets. And one thing that was articulated in that very thorough study of the Jewish community today is that 8% of the Jewish community identifies as racially diverse. And then when you go to the 30 and under category, I believe it's 15% of the Jewish community identifies as racially diverse. And that is obviously there have been other studies that have given other numbers, but this is a very weighty one and very trusted source, the Pew. So I think that's really important, thinking about what is the Jewish community going to look like, right, in 10, 20 years, 30 years. And then the second study, which is the study with the JOC initiative, Jews of Color initiative, that they partnered up with professors and sociologists to do a study about. This was a bit more of an in-depth study, of a smaller study, but going deeper with over close to 1,200 Jews of color. And that study revealed many things, but among the things that it revealed was that 80% of people who identified in the study, well, people who are Jews of color, that was the entire study, 80% of respondents said that they both feel connected to organized, mainstream, mostly white Jewish communities. And at the same time, 80% have experienced some kind of racism or discrimination in Jewish communities. So these are pretty intense numbers and studies. And I guess, I just want to ask you, what is your sense of what these studies mean and tell us, but also how do those kind of jive up with and kind of match up with your own experience, personal experience, and the experience of other Jews of color that you know and work with?
Yeah. So, and if I forget something, just remind me, because there's a lot in there. There have been several studies over the last couple of decades that have put Jews of color in a variety of percentage categories, anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20% of the Jewish community. And this recent one is the Pew study is 8%. People have gotten caught up in the numbers and forgetting sometimes that these numbers are people. There was another study that said that number was too high. But what I really want people to understand is whatever the numbers are, Jews of color are consistently undercounted. And the population of Jews of color, people who self-identify as Jews of color, is growing. So spending all this time arguing about the numbers is just really nonsensical. It makes no sense. And the significant thing that's really significant is the future, because the Pew study puts 15% of Jews under 30. That's the Jews of color, and that's we're talking about millions of people. My degree in sociology is a quantitative one, but I suck at math, so I prefer qualitative studies. But we're talking about a lot of people, and the Jewish community needs to. The larger Jewish community needs to stop holding on to stereotypical markers of what a Jew looks like, if they were ever relevant in the first place. And so we need to stop thinking you don't look Jewish, and we need to stop thinking of what a Jew looks like, because really what the studies are showing is that the longer Jews are in America, or in the United States, or America really, so, even including Canada, we look like the rest of the population. So, whatever racial demographics, ethnic demographics you see in the larger population, you will start to see in in our Jewish community. So we just need to recognize when people of color come into our communities, yes, they could be Jewish, or no, they could, maybe they're not Jewish, but we need to stop assuming that they are not. The other thing too that I know a lot of my white colleagues are really saddened by, but Jews of color have been screaming about this for a very long time, which is that Jews of color consistently experience some form of racism or some form of discrimination within the Jewish community. And since, the study also talked about many Jews of color have multiple racial categories that they identify with, so they might consider having two races. And I did a talk this weekend with Dorsey Emmett, which is a Reconstruction synagogue in Ottawa. And so Jews of color experience racism, and they also experience the intersectionality of their identities. And so what happens when you have more than one marginalized identity, it actually winds up creating new categories of discrimination. So how this plays out for someone like me, and this is just one example, I'm not discriminated against just because I'm a woman, or just because I'm Black, or just because I'm queer. I have, this is the example that I can think of right now, but a couple of years ago, there was an opinion piece in some Jewish paper that critiqued comments that I had made, comments that someone else had made. And one thing we all had in common is that we were all Jews of color. And this writer did not agree with whatever she was critiquing. I'm not even sure what. Maybe it was, I was talking about race. So what she did was, I can't possibly know what I'm talking about because I'm not Jewish. So she stripped away my Jewish identity. She also did this with the other folks, and it was a female writer. So once she stripped away my Jewish identity, then she called me anti-Semitic because I'm talking about the Jewish community. How could I do that if I'm Jewish? That is ridiculous. That is, you don't do, that doesn't happen to other people. And so I experienced within Jewish spaces anti-Semitism and racism at the same time.
Can you give a couple other maybe examples of either from your own experience or from people that you've spoken to through your work, of things that might happen that would fit into this category of, the experiences of racism and, is it overt, is it implicit, is it, it would be really helpful.
It's all over the place. I mean, some of it is quite harmful and some of it is, less harmful, but it's still hurtful. I know a rabbinical student who's a rabbinical student of color, walked into a synagogue. I believe the synagogue was in New York, but I'm not totally sure. Invited by the rabbi.
In New York, but it was not SAJ.
No, it was not. But there's a lot of synagogues.
Yes,
a lot of synagogues in New York. Yeah. But walked into a synagogue, and actually, I'm pretty sure it was a conservative synagogue, but I'm not totally sure. I'm not sure at all. Because I've been collecting these stories, and I have I have a bunch of them, and I use to teach. And I ask permission if I can share these stories. I just don't share the names. Anyway, walked into a synagogue, invited by the rabbi, and the security people there, who I believe were not Jewish, acted as gatekeepers and saying you were in the wrong place, and did not allow this person to enter into the synagogue. There's a very a powerful story from the author Mara Gad, who I don't know, and she was the keynote speaker for the CCAR, the Reform Senate, Reform Judaism Biennial, whatever, which is huge. And she has written publicly about how she experienced racism at every entry point of walking into this conference. And to make matters worse, and she's written about this publicly, that when she talked about it in her keynote, people were like, you don't know, that couldn't have happened to you. And she's like, yes, this happened. This is my experience. But the thing that really breaks my heart, I mean, all of it's just sad. But what I want people to understand there's so many things I want people to understand. But after Pittsburgh, um, as a campus rabbi, it was the first time that many of my students had experienced, even though it was far away, but any form of anti-Semitism, causing some of them to remove Jewish iconography, bracelets, things like that. And there was a real fear amongst the college students. And Mara, in her telling of the story, said that there was a call out amongst Jewish organizations: come to shul, come to synagogue this Shabbat so we can stand in solidarity. I think it was even called Solidarity Shabbat.
It was Solidarity Shabbat. Yeah.
And again, I don't know Mara Gad, so if she sees this, I'm really coming with the best of intentions. She heard that call and was like, I'm going to go. I'm Jewish. I'm going to go. And when she arrived at the synagogue, they basically created, they were like, the gatekept or gatekeeping, would not allow her in. And their response, their reasoning for it is, please understand, we are at a heightened sense of security. And my response, I don't know what Mara Gad's response is, but my response is that the person who did that horrible thing in Pittsburgh did not look like me or Mara Gad. Mara Gad is a black woman. And this fear that people have against black people, where it is repeatedly more likely for these horrible incidences to be done by white men, but people don't have the same level of fear. So Mara was not allowed into synagogue because they were afraid of her, or afraid that she would be somebody that would do something. And then there's so many stories, but Yehuda Webster, who works for J. Fredge, I think he still works for J. Fredge, was carrying a Sefer Torah scroll from one synagogue to his car, wearing a kippah, and was basically attacked by members of an Orthodox community, ultra-Orthodox community, saying, where are you going with that? Assuming that he couldn't possibly own it or have it or be responsible for it or whatever.
It's interesting to me that, I mean, these stories are so heartbreaking. And I also imagine that so many people have more microaggressions as well in their own experiences too, right? Like those are really dramatic stories. And I imagine many others also just might have sort of more passive comments or, I don't even know, but I don't know if you have other examples of that, but, I guess just my question is, what do you help us figure out as communities, which is this exciting, wonderful new job that you have, what advice do you have for us as communities trying to do better and trying to be places that are truly welcoming? What can we do to make sure that that kind of thing doesn't happen in our own synagogue?
So I realized when you said that there are some really horrible examples, and there are some that are more smaller, but they're still hurtful. And I'll just give you some examples so that are more likely to happen. And this was kind of funny. Rabbi Mordecai Liebling, who is, I just love him. He's been around a long time and doing this work as a white male bearded rabbi long before it was cool to do it. Him and I taught a series of workshops for a synagogue and on the West Coast, and who were really trying to move forward on to moving towards anti-racism. And the spiritual leader who introduced me, and introduced Mordecai as well, had my bio and said, Rabbi, my name says Rabbi on the screen. And this woman, before she asked her question, because she had a very serious question and she was of a particular age, she said, first of all, are you Jewish? Like right after all of that, which says to me that she had made an assumption in her none of it. And like all the material said that that I'm rabbi, but in her mind, for whatever reason, it didn't equate to Jewish. And I know that's funny, but I have had people say to me, even when my title is present, "Are you Jewish?" And I don't understand that, but I know it happens to me. It happens to other rabbis of color, and I don't know. I don't know any non-Jewish rabbis. I know there are Messianic rabbis out there. I get it, but um, yeah, that's and these are funny, but they're just sad.
I mean, it's funny because it's a way for you to protect yourself
Mhm,
because it's not
mhm.
actually funny.
Right. Yeah, you're totally
I've
right.
actually said that, we've had students, B'nai students who have talked about how hurtful it is to
Mhm.
be constantly questioned, kids who have many racial identities. And I've told that to some people and there's been some laughter and I'm like, but actually it's deeply, deeply
No, it's
hurtful.
yeah, you're
Said,
totally
and
right. I mean, a lot of laughter comes from pain.
yeah,
And a lot of ways for the best way often for me to communicate some of these stories is to laugh about it or to make them
yeah,
funny. But they are sad. Like
yeah.
I'll tell one more story. When I was a campus rabbi, this is really sad. There was, their parents come to visit colleges, and if they're Jewish, they often come to Hillel or wherever the rabbi's office is. And this daughter and mother came in, and I was upstairs in my office, and the assistant director was downstairs, and she answered the door. And they said, is the rabbi here? We really want to meet the rabbi because my daughter is thinking about coming to school. So I, the assistant director calls me and said, there's a family here who wants to meet you. I said, great. So I come downstairs, and the assistant director says, this is our rabbi, Rabbi Sandra Lawson. And the mother just looks at me. She just can't figure out what to do. And the only thing she can figure out to say is, are you ordained? And I said, I am. And I was just trying to like move us along. And then she asked me like three different times in three different ways, but it was still the same question, are you ordained? And I looked at the daughter, who was just, her face was like, oh my God. And so I'm like, I have to end this somehow. And so the mother just was just really confused by my presence. And the only thing I could think of to say, I said, hey, if you come up in my office, I have a little business card this that proves that I'm a rabbi. But the funny that I mean, this is things that white people have to figure out because I just don't understand. What nationally ranked university or anybody would? It's not like I introduced myself. I mean, it was somebody else introduced me. Would hire? I don't even know what that means. Like hire a non-ordained rabbi. Like, will you be a rabbi for our students and not let me? I don't want to check any of your credentials.
Wow. I think it is. It's people who are brought up in a certain way and what Jews look like, and it's really hard to unpack that. I mean, speaking of that, well, two things. You mentioned the word anti-racism, and I did want to address that question. Some of us have read Ibrahim X. Kendi's book, some of us have studied that kind of idea of anti-racism. Could you speak a little bit about what you mean when you say that, and especially how it applies to working within the Jewish community?
Yeah. So what many people are starting to understand, and some of us have known for a long time, that it is not enough to say that you're not racist because our society, the DNA of our society, is racist. Because from the our country was built. The wealth of our country was built on stolen land and stolen bodies. And from the very beginning, our society was designed to privilege one group of people over another group of people. And racism has evolved over time. It doesn't look like my parents' racism. Thank God it doesn't look like the racism my grandparents experienced, but it's still racism. And so to be anti-racist means that you are actively, physically or emotionally working to be less racist, to be anti-racist. Because there is no category of not racist. You're either racist or you're anti-racist. To be not racist means you're not doing anything to dismantle our racist system.
Can you share that metaphor that we've spoken about before?
Oh, the rain.
Yeah.
The rain. Okay. Okay. So,
Because I think some people might
yeah.
hear that and say, well, Rabbi Lawson, what does that mean? Because I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't hold racist, thoughts or intentions. And I don't exactly know,
Mhm.
what that means. Like, I think some people may be like, okay, that kind of get it. I don't really get it. So, just helping us along wherever we are in
Mhm.
this conversation. Some of us very much, have read and
Mhm.
I've been in the SAJ, reading group and all these things, and some it might be new. So what is it? I guess what does that look like for
Mhm.
us as individuals
Mhm. Yeah.
to
So
do?
I started using the rain metaphor, I think, when I was teaching at a community college, and I maybe I found an example of it somewhere. I'm not sure, but I've been using it for a long time because it works. So I ask people to imagine that we are babies, beautiful babies, and that we're out in the rain. The babies are out in the rain. And when I started telling my wife this story, because I practice everything on her, she's like, "Why is the baby out in the rain? Why is the baby out? Just let it go." I mean, if you meet my wife, you'll understand. But the baby's out in the rain, and as babies, we don't have any biases. We don't have racism. We don't have homophobia. We don't have sexism because we haven't learned any of those things yet. Those things have to be taught to us and learned. And while the baby's out in the rain, that rain, if you can imagine, that rain is racism, that rain is homophobia, that rain is sexism, all of the isms, all of the biases that we have as a society. And as we grow up and become adults, at some point we're going to realize that we are soaked from that rain, and we want to dry off because we don't want to be racist, sexist, homophobic, and we don't want to contribute to this type of system. We don't want to contribute to a society that privileges one group of people over another group of people. So we dry off. The problem is that we dry off, we're good, but the rain comes back. So we have to continue to work to remove the racism, work to remove the rain from our bodies. And it's a constant challenge because we are in a society that is continuously sending us messages um, based on stereotypes about different groups of people.
Thank you. I think
Mhm.
it's a helpful analogy. Um, so just getting back to this question of, there's a lot of Jews of color and there's a lot of real examples that
Mhm.
almost everyone can name, like 80%, right, can point to
Mhm.
examples of when they've been either explicitly or implicitly hurt or excluded from within their own Jewish communities. Um, Help us understand like what we can do to prevent that or to deal with that, like what
Mhm.
as individuals and as a synagogue.
Yeah, so this time of year is a good time of year for that because we're all sort of doing this heshbon and nefesh, this internal accounting of our soul. And also, I'm hoping that because of COVID, we're all sort of hopefully thinking about the type of people we want to be in society and how we want our society to be. And um, when we're in Jewish community or we're in Jewish spaces, and if someone comes in that may not be white or may not even like gender norms, like, but may not be white. That is not the time to ask them to tell you their life story when you meet them for the first time. That is not the time to ask them or to tell them when did you convert or to treat them as if they're new. That's another thing. Like this study talked, there's a lot of people that talked about how every time they went to a synagogue, they were treated as if they were new. And there's a young person here that I work with in North Carolina that has stopped going to synagogue and they've been a member there for a long time. Um, and because every time they went, people treated them like they were new. And it was it was frustrating. So they just stopped going. Um, and and that's also not the time to expect that person to teach you everything about what it's like to be a Black person. What I want people to do, because I've had people say to me, well, when do I find this information out? I'm like, well, why do you need to know? Like, why is it so important that you as a white person need to know intimate details about my life? Or why is it important for you to know my personal story? All stories, all Jewish origin stories, all personal stories are awesome and they're all great. Just because I'm a person of color doesn't make my story that exciting. And what I say to people is build a relationship. When you build relationships with people, that's how you get to know them. If when people say, I ask people if they converted, or ask people how they're Jewish because I want to get to know them. I said, no, 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 no. Because if it was really about getting to know them, then you would get to know them. This is about you and some trauma. Are you trying to feel safe? It's not about trying to get to know them. So what I want people to do is to, create an environment so that when people come into our communities, all are welcome, all feel included. We create strategies for welcoming people, so they can all feel part of the community. The first time I walked into CBH, I felt like a member of the community, even though I had never been there before. That was magical. And I have to tell you, I have been in many, 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 many synagogues since then. Honestly, if I had walked into many of those other ones, I wouldn't be Jewish, and I definitely wouldn't be a rabbi today. And if we don't get this right, we are losing talent. We are losing future rabbis, future Jewish educators, future Jewish leaders, actors. Like, think about it. And the cool thing about the study is that these are people who want to be engaged. They desperately want to be part of the community, and they are also dealing with racism and dealing with discrimination. And many of them still feel like they can't be their full selves in our Jewish community. So that breaks my heart. Even though I know it's true because I experience it, it still breaks my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I mean, I think it's the new thing is actually something I've tried to talk to SAJ about in particular, like when there have been members of the synagogue who've been members for decades, and then they come to services more regularly for a reason, maybe they're saying Kaddish or something, and then, oh, they're new, and it can be very, very insulting. So coming with that now, when you and I have spoken in the past, we talked about the proactive things we can do, but also the teshuva, like the repair work that can happen also. Because things might go wrong, right? Things might happen and things might not go according to our hope or vision, right? What is your any thoughts on how we can kind of as a community do teshuva?
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I think one of the reasons why the rain metaphor is a good metaphor, because that rain returns. So, because of how our society is, we will misstep. I have misgendered people before. Been a queer person a long time, started using pronouns before everybody knew what the hell that was. I mean, they know what pronouns is, but like, it wasn't like, tell us your pronouns. And I still mess up and I feel bad. And when white people mess up on racism, I have a colleague who recently got two Black people confused, and he's been working on this for a while also. It felt horrible. And in those moments, we need to own it, apologize, and we need to move on. we need to do teshuva for ourselves as well. One example of this, when I was at convention, whenever that was that we had convention, the Reconstructing Judaism convention, I was teaching a class and we were behind schedule, and I left the building with like 3 or 4 other rabbis, to get lunch for ourselves and other folks. And it was an unusual snowstorm came in at that time. And we all came back. All the rabbis were white except for me. And we all had bags in our hands. And a congregant of a Reconstruction synagogue assumed. Now it was interesting because I was flanked, like really like Rabbi Liz Bolton was on one side, I think Sarah Lev was on another side of me, and this woman assumed that I'm delivering her food and tries to grab my food, and then I don't know if she saw my name tag or I said no, I'm not delivering your food. I'm not even sure if I said that I'm a rabbi, but in that moment she realized what she had done, like she got it and felt bad. I didn't have the time to help her process that. I needed to eat my lunch and get to the program that I was, the workshop that I was leading. But this woman spent a good chunk of the rest of the convention trying to convince me that she wasn't racist. I never called her racist. I never said anything to her. But what I would have liked to have seen was because I told her I think she may have apologized or something, because I know she said, like, when she made that mistake, she looked at me and she's like, I know what you think. What you think. I said, how do you know what I'm thinking? But what would have been nice is if she would have, wow, I did something incredibly racist in that moment. I've been working on this for a long time and I am sorry, I messed up. That's all she had to do. Instead of trying to convince me for the next day that she was a racist. I have no investment in this person. If I saw her again, I would not know. The good thing is that her rabbi is a good friend of ours, and they talk about it and helped her understand some things. But if she would have owned it, instead of trying to convince me of all the work that she had done and apologized, and then and I accepted her apology, and then start to do the work of healing for ourselves. And I think that's sometimes that's something that people forget. Like, at some point you have to forgive yourself.
It's really helpful. And we've talked about this and how that also connects to gender as well. And if someone, right, you misgender someone and they feel hurt, to make it about you, just apologize, move on, and correct it and move on. And I think that's really, it's a really important kind of general strategy. So this is really helpful. I'm wondering, two questions, you can kind of decide which one you want to talk about to end. One is, what do you think an anti-racist Jewish organization looks like, or is like working towards, and as one that we would hope to build at SAJ, perhaps, and hopefully. And then the second is, if you could tell us a little bit about how because you're new to this movement job, or relatively new, what is in store for us as members of Reconstructionist congregations. What's the hope as you come on and help us all out and do this work?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer. Actually,
they may be connected. Yeah,
I think they are connected. So, I mean, one, I can imagine what an anti-racist Jewish organization looks like. But one thing I will say, for us to get there, the leadership of our organizations need to match up with who we're serving, and need to match up with the demographics of the community. So whatever diversity a synagogue has, their leadership should reflect that. Like, I still talk to folks who have a sizable number of queer people in their community, but there's no queer people in leadership. Same with people of color. And once you bring more diverse voices to leadership, that's where things start to grow and change. When I took this job and Reconstructing Judaism, I really want to make the Jewish world better for rabbis of color, cantors of color. I know we don't train cantors, but I'm in conversations with cantors of color, and our rabbinical students of color. And I'm working with the Thriving Communities team and the president's office to create a pilot for our leadership in Jewish communities to to move them towards anti-racism, to really um, uh, look at their communities, assess their communities, figure out where their communities actually are, um, and once they know where they are, then they can move forward. I'm pausing because I've had a lot of conversations with people who, like, talked to one rabbi recently who thought that she was way behind. I'm so far behind my colleagues on this issue. I said, no, you're actually way ahead of many of your colleagues. And then there are some rabbis who think that they're further along, and they're not. And assessing without judgment, that's another thing too. Create an assessment tool without judging, so people can honestly figure out where they are. My hope, and my dream, my fantasy, in my perfect world is that I plan to reach out to an East Coast synagogue. So actually, you're the person that I was going to talk to, an East Coast synagogue. And if you can't do it, it's fine. East Coast synagogue, a West Coast synagogue, a synagogue in Canada and one in the Midwest, and provide this pilot for the leaders in the community. Leaders are defined however communities define their leaders, but like the rabbi, cantor, spiritual leader, education director, board, whatever, to do this tool together and meet with me and finish it by January, and then present at the convention, and then hopefully other communities will want to do it. So that's my hope and my dream.
Let's talk offline about that, yes. But that sounds it sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
Well, it's really amazing. I just want to also say I think it's you are the inaugural director of racial diversity, equity, and inclusion. No other movement, really. I guess there was Reform Movement had a audacious.
No, they have one. Yeah, she's amazing. So they her title's a little different. It's for they picked the same title for the same reasons that I did, but they just moved the letters around. I think it's racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. But instead of DEI, there's an R.
So then never mind. But it's still very exciting for our small movement to make this a priority. And the Reconstructionist movement also put out a 3-year strategic plan, and anti-racism is very central to the plan, which is extremely impressive. And if people want to take a look at that plan, I'm sure we could give people access to that or access to the materials. So we look forward to being in this work. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and what to do. I mean, I think it's so connected, like you said, it's so connected to the holidays, because it's really about cheshbon nefesh. It's about soul seeking, looking at ourselves, and also doing that without judgment, looking and just seeing like we're products of the society that we're born in, and we can do better still. Each of us really can grow, and it's not a one-time process. It is an ongoing journey. So I don't know if there's any other final words you want to offer, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Shana Tova. And I'm really excited to do this work. And one of the things I love about the job that I'm doing is I get to have conversations with people like you. Yeah.
Well, we're so grateful that you're spent this time with us ahead of the holidays, and that you're able to bring your Torah and your experiences to our community for us as we continue on in our own work in racial justice and anti-racism. So thank you. And Shana Tova to you.
Thank you.